My name is Tina. With me today is Sohan. We are from PwC's GTI team, so Global Threat Intelligence team. As Ryan alluded to, we are going to be talking about statistics, but we are going to try and make it as interesting as possible. Before we get into it, I'll just give a little bit of background about myself and Sohan about himself. So yes, a little bit about me. I've been with the GTI team for just over a year now. I'm the strategic crime lead. And I focus largely on producing strategic, operational, and tactical type of intelligence reports. Before that, I have about 10 or 11 years working in a more of a traditional criminal intelligence space. So coming into cyber has been a really cool experience and quite a big learning curve. But I'll pass over to Sohan to introduce himself.
Amazing. Thank you, Tina. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. As Tina mentioned, my name is Sohan Lokula. Also based in Melbourne from the GTI team. Also been in the team for approximately 1 year. I focus on APAC-based and crime-based threat actors. And prior to joining PwC, I worked in the financial industry, working in threat intelligence and security operation roles. Back to you, Tina.
So as I said, my background coming from a criminal intelligence background, what's made it easier for me to understand ransomware is to contextualize and compare it to real world crimes. So I'm not saying that the impact on the victims are the same or even the tools are remotely the same, but there is an opportunistic and nuanced nature to them that where there's a little bit of an overlap. So real world crimes like petty theft, property crimes, aggravated burglaries, they're largely considered opportunistic. Obviously, there are a few instances where there's more targeted types of them. But these crimes, like many others, are just a part of our lives that we've largely come to accept. Now, ransomware to me is that online version of these real world crimes. They're largely opportunistic. They're really annoying. They're here to stay. But what I'm saying is with real world crime, yes, they are a part of our lives. We have accepted them, but that doesn't mean that we've just laid down and let them happen, and we're not doing anything to prevent them. So we take steps from a traditional policing perspective to try and understand them, to understand how we can protect ourselves and the community, and ultimately disrupt and disturb them from occurring in the first place. And doing that, what we do is data analysis. So we can use data analysis to understand where these crimes are happening, like hotspot analysis or environmental scanning. And this type of analysis can help us prioritize, or it's help police prioritize their resources, prioritize what areas in the community should be addressed, look at how we can respond to these crimes occurring proactively. And we do this from both a high level and a granular level of analysis. And this can give us actionable intelligence that can help us disrupt, displace, or otherwise deter them from happening in the first place. Now, you might say, hang on a second, we do this to understand ransomware trends. And you're right, we do. And there's been a massive shift in recent years from business owners wanting to understand the unique threat that ransomware operators are posing to them. And there is more and more reporting happening out there that does provide that high level analysis around the impact of ransomware and what kind of impact it's having across countries and sectors. But for the most part, we do look at it from a very high level perspective. So looking at who are the top 5 or 10 ransomware operators at a global level, what are the top 5 or 10 countries that are being most impacted at a global level, and what are the top 5 or 10 sectors that are being impacted at a global level. Now, the reason, if we do a deep dive into that data, we'll find that the top 5 or 10 ransomware actors globally aren't necessarily going to translate to the same, being the top 5 or 10 ransomware operators to a single country or sector. So for instance, the number 1 ransomware actor affecting the US isn't going to be the same as the number 1 ransomware operator impacting Australia or Canada, or even a ransomware operator that's impacting the healthcare sector in the US. It's going to be different to the ransomware operator that's impacting the healthcare sector in the UK or in India. So while a high-level analysis can provide a really useful overview of ransomware trends, without doing a more granular level of analysis, it can prevent us from seeing some more nuanced nature or nuanced trends related to a specific threat actor or country or sector. So by drilling down into the available data sets, examining victimology, geographic trends, specific sector impacts, we can uncover, as I said, those nuances within a ransomware leak site data victim that can provide actionable insights and intelligence into victimologies and the threat actors. So this type of analysis can help us as intelligence analysts understand the threat actors' biases in choosing victims, alignment with nation states, or just simply understanding their own internal set of rules. Now, the catch is that it is a time-consuming process, but the trade-off is the invaluable intelligence that we gain. Intelligence that can help organizations prioritize which ransomware threat actors to focus on over others. And let's face it, it's providing actionable intelligence that allows us to be proactive is what intelligence is all about. And it's how we can create that resilience against ransomware attacks.
So without going into a bit too much detail, in 2023, there were approximately 3,735 leak site victims. Then in 2024, Threat set a new record with 4,837 leak site victims. Now, already within the first 4 months of 2025, there have approximately been 2,612 leak site victims, which is around the same number of leak site victims that we observed by August in both 2023 and 2024. It's worthwhile noting that in the first half of 2024, these leak site victim numbers were following a similar trajectory of what was experienced in 2023. However, in the second half of 2024, there was a month-on-month increase in the number of victims, as you can see from the graph. And additionally, last year on average, there was approximately a 30% increase in the number of victims across the board. However, it was not translated to the top 10 sectors. Despite several industries seeing an uptake in the victim numbers, the education sector, which was among the top most impacted sectors in 2024, saw approximately a 21% decrease in the number of victims, dropping from 244 in 2023 to 194 victims in 2024. This reduction is due to these law enforcement operations last year, which I will speak to a bit more about soon. But threat actors such as CLOP, Voice Society, and Ricida also contributed to a decline in the education sector victims. These groups were highly active in 2023, but significantly reduced their presence in targeting the education sector in 2024, leading to this decrease in the overall number of ransomware victims in the education sector. We assess this is likely an anomaly in 2024, as you already observed 84 victims this year compared to the 34 victims at the same time last year. So we can timeline key events that occurred last year and track it to identify some key correlations in the data. There were four main things that happened in 2024, starting with the law enforcement operations targeting Lockbit in early February. Then there was the Black Cat exit scam, and then the emergence of Ransom following that in March. And then in May, Lockbit released victim data that should have been deleted. Now, this caused a bit of unintended reaction within the ransomware ecosystem where the trust of affiliates was breached by Lockbit.
So essentially, in May, Lockbit released its data victim, which obviously caused some unintended reactions within that ransomware ecosystem. And Lockbit basically breached the trust of its affiliates and reinforced sentiment amongst business owners that ransomware operators really can't be trusted. And it really threw the marketplace into a bit of disarray. So realistically or theoretically, what we would have expected off the back of these law enforcement operations would have been a decrease in ransomware leak sites, especially given Lockbit accounted for over 1,000 leak site victims in 2023, and Alpha V accounted for 401 leak site victims. Now, logic says that numbers should have reduced, but instead we experienced a 30% increase in leak site victims in 2024. And that's even if you remove the repeat victims that Lockbit and Alpha V had posted during 2024. Now, because of an increase in this was because of an increase in the number of ransomware operators that we had seen throughout 2024. We observed a gradual increase in the number of active ransomware operators entering the market. And in May, we saw, you can see on the graph there that in May there was 31 active ransomware groups. In July there were 48, and by December, or in December, there was 52 ransomware groups. And this all kind of followed this was basically because there was a dispersion of affiliates following that shutdown of Alpha V and the takedown of Lockbit, which caused that spike towards the mid-year, which you can see on that graph there. So for 2024, there were a total of 95 active ransomware operators that we saw kind of throughout the year. And 2025 is looking to be pretty similar if we continue going the way we are. But essentially, this has led to what we believe to be a death by 1,000 cuts phenomenon, where within the ransomware ecosystem. That is, we're having a lot of smaller groups enter that ecosystem, which are individually not recording that a huge number of leak site victims, but they're collectively contributing to the increased threat posed by ransomware. So this increase in the number of threat actors makes it really hard to defend against ransomware operators, and that emphasizes why we need to do a little bit of a deeper analysis into understanding the market trends and the victim typology of these groups. So this slide shows the number of ransomware operators that have individually recorded a certain number of victims and the combined total number of victims of those ransomware operators. So, for instance, there are 2 ransomware actors that each recorded over 500 leak site victims, and collectively they accounted for 1,045 leak site victims in 2024. And then if you go down the next tier, there are again only 2 ransomware operators that recorded individually 200 to 499 victims, but collectively they accounted for 540 leak site victims. So the threat actors within these groups are those ones that generally get a lot more attention from cybersecurity groups, media outlets, and law enforcement just because of the high volume of activity that we see from them. So in the first group, you've got Ransom Hub and Lockbit, and then in the second group is Play and Akira. Now, these 4 groups collectively made up 33% of all leak site victims in 2024. And as I said, they are the ones that everyone's kind of aware of. Now, even looking into some of their trends and their victimology, it can be quite useful. So for instance, Play, when we did this analysis, what it showed was while Play has a very broad range of victims from different sectors, it had only launched attacks against 12 different countries in 2024. As opposed to the likes of Ransom Hub, who had victims listed from 70 different countries and Lockbit victims from 64 different countries. But understanding which ransomware operators are most active across different regions is integral to being proactive and resilient against them. So in 2025, Play's continued to show it's only targeting certain countries, having listed victims from 5 countries so far. So this just highlights the importance of, or highlights that, I guess from a global scale, Play does look like a huge threat actor or a threat from the ransomware ecosystem. But that threat is only going to be relevant to the countries, or the 12 countries, or the 5 countries this year that it's actually targeting. So now when we're looking at the 11 ransomware operators that are sitting within that 100 to 199 victim mark, again, most of them are pretty opportunistic, but there are some nuances within their targeting. So Beyond Lian, for instance, is very similar to Play. It has very broad targeting as far as the sectors it goes, but it is really limited in the number of countries, or the countries that it's actually launching attacks in. So in 2024, it launched attacks against 12 different countries, and so far in 2025, it's launched attacks only in 2 countries, and that's the US and Australia. Whereas Hunters International, Akira, and Killen are slightly more diversified in the countries that they're launching attacks in. So there are 15 groups in these tiers that I've just talked about, that 500 plus victims, 200 to 499 victims, and the 100 to 199 victim mark. And as I said, they are the ones that are generally getting that more media attention, law enforcement attention, because of the high number of attacks that they're generally recording. But that does mean that there's around 80 other ransomware operators that are maybe flying under the radar that are collectively contributing to that death by 1,000 cuts phenomenon that we referenced earlier. So in fact, these 80 ransomware operators account for 67% of all leak site victims, which were recorded in 2024, which is a lot more than the 33% of the 4 ransomware groups in the in those top 2 tiers that we spoke about. So by doing this kind of analysis, we can going deeper into the data related to ransomware entities that are maybe not as commonly prioritized. We can identify those nuances that I spoke about earlier within ransomware groups and their victim preferences, allowing us to better understand a ransomware actor's specific threat to a sector or country. And this in turn can allow businesses to be more resilient to the threats that are unique to them. So, for instance, an automotive sector company in Germany prioritizing Ransom Hub and Lockbit over threat actors doesn't really make sense when these two ransomware groups, didn't even impact that sector, according to their leak site victim last year. So in the following slides, we're just going to go through a few ransomware groups and pull out a few of the trends that we found when we use this type of analysis, just to showcase how it can help businesses prioritize the threats that are specific to them. So first up, we've got leaked data, or Lunar Moth. So they emerged in 2021, and while there is some public reporting about them, they've generally remained under the radar. Now, when we first started doing that deep dive into leak site data, we started off looking at sector targeting within the US in 2024. And one of the sectors that kind of popped out to us was the legal sector. And when we were looking at the ransomware operators that were targeting the sector, leaked data appeared amongst the most active ransomware operators that we've largely considered opportunistic as the way that they operate. And these groups these are the groups that show no real specific preference to either the country or the sector or both. So as you can see on that slide there, you've got Beyond Leon, Lockbit, Hunters International, Ransom Hub, Macaire, Killen, and then you had leaked data who kind of piqued our interest. So when drilling down into leaked data and their targeting in 2024, it became pretty apparent that there was a little bit of a preference there towards launching attacks against the legal and financial sectors. In fact, in 2024, of its 32 leak site victims, the legal sector accounted for 36% of all its leak site victims. Now, looking at 2025 legal sector, looking at the 2025 legal sector leak site victims, for the US, leaked data is now the top threat actor that is impacting the sector, accounting for 19% of all US legal sector leak site victims so far in 2025. And then drilling down specifically on leaked data, they are so far this year only targeting sectors within the US, and the legal sector is one of its top choices, accounting for 47% of all its leak site victims. So leaked data is a really good example of the kind of threat actor that, unless we'd gone beyond that high level analysis, would never picked up on it, on its sector preferences, especially if we'd only looked at the top 10 ransomware groups impacting the US or targeting the US last year, particularly because leaked data in amongst that long list of ransomware operators targeting the US, it sat at 24, at the 24th most active ransomware or threat actor last year.
So FOG, they recorded 88 leak site victims in 2024, and it sits in the tier of ransomware operators where we referred to as earlier that are not recording many leak site victims compared to the others. Globally, following Lockbit and Ransom Hub, FOG was the most active threat actor targeting the education sector. Usually, it's Lockbit and Ransom Hub that are the ones that our organizations prioritize, as mentioned previously, regardless of sector and country. But FOG may slip through this list as it's another threat actor that is not as active as compared to the bigger groups as mentioned. But analysis of its victimology has shown that in the past 2 years, it had a preference towards the education sector, particularly in the United States, followed by Australia and Oman. And interestingly, FOG has not appeared to have listed any victims from the UK, highlighting the importance of prioritizing threat actors targeting both the sector and the country organization operates in. As previously mentioned, organizations prioritizing threat actors based solely on the high-level sector targeting can unknowingly spend many resources on threat actors that are not of use.
Okay, so Everest. In 2024, Everest had 67 leak site victims from 10 different countries. 50 of those leak site victims were from the US, so showing a very clear preference in the country that it was launching attacks in. So in 2024, its leak site victims were also from 13 different sectors, with the healthcare being its most impacted. In fact, 26 of its 2024 lakeside victims were from the healthcare sector, and 25 of those were in the US. So Everest sits within that 50 to 99 victim bracket. And when looking at a high level, it seemed like a little bit of a smaller threat than others. But then when we did a more granular level analysis, it was actually one of the top ransomware groups targeting the healthcare sector last year. And 2025 shows that the threat actor, while it's keeping a very similar tempo to the number of ransomware lakeside victims it's posting, it's continued to show a preference towards the US and Italy. However, it's shifted its preference or the sectors that it's impacting, with the professional services sector now accounting for 39% of all its lakeside victims, as opposed to the healthcare sector, which is now only 1% of its targeted sectors. So again, this shift in targeting highlights that importance of remaining up to date with the shifts in activity by threat actors, so businesses can remain agile in their responses to the threats as they change.
In 2024, Arcus Media had a total of 56 victims from 30 different countries, with the main one being Brazil, with 13 victims, followed by the United States, with 8 victims. Now, what is interesting here is that in 2024, the number of victims Brazil saw last year doubled from 58 victims in 2023 to 106 in 2024. So Arcus Media contributed to 12% of all the victims in Brazil, which was the second most active ransomware threat actor targeting Brazil, coming in after ransomware, which accounted for 26 of the 106 lakeside victims. In 2025, Arcus Media has continued to favor Brazil as its victim country of choice, while this year in the United States, it has only recorded 1 victim. So for Brazil, as far as defending against ransomware goes, Arcus Media is the one to look out for, particularly for businesses in the manufacturing, technology, and professional services sectors.
Okay, so kill security is the last one that we're going to go through, but it is a great example of how doing a deep dive into the lakeside data can reveal significant trends that a high-level analysis will likely miss. So it does sit within the 100 to 199 victim range, so it is a slightly more impactful group than the others that we've just discussed. But when looking at its targeting patterns, and looking at the sectors and countries it's targeting, there were some really clear trends about kill security. So last year, Kill Security recorded 134 leak site victims in total. And the US and the India were by far its top most targeted countries, recording 39 leak site victims in the US, or 29% of its leak site victims, and 35% in India, which was 26% of its leak site victims. But for comparison, its third most targeted country, it only recorded 7 lakeside victims. So it really did show a preference in the countries that it was launching attacks in. But then drilling down into India. So for all of 2024, India had 95 lakeside victims posted. And the 2 most impacted sectors for the country was the healthcare sector and the technology sectors. But then drilling down into these sectors within India, KillSec was the top most active ransomware operator launching attacks. So in the healthcare sector, KillSec had 10 of the 13 lakeside victims in India, highlighting a very clear preference towards the healthcare sector by KillSec. And then in the technology sector, it accounted for 8 of the 17 lakeside victims, whereas Ransom Hub, which was the second most active, only recorded 4 of the lakeside victims, just to demonstrate the proportion that KillSec was making up for there. So in 2025, it's continued to mainly focus on launching attacks in the US and India. In the US, its most impacted sector for KillSec is the professional services sector. And in India, it's continued to really focus on healthcare and financial services sector.
So in terms of the sectors that we observed the highest percentage increase in the number of victims, the maritime sector led with a whopping 200% increase in the number of victims from 2023. Ransomware attacks targeting ports, ships, and related systems can cause a significant disruption, which can last for several days, as evidenced by the DP World attack in Australia last year. Following the maritime sector, the chemicals and forestry and paper sectors experienced a 144% and 100% increase in the number of victims, respectively. The construction and food and agriculture sectors also experienced notable increases in the victims being posted to the ransomware leak sites. The construction sector saw a 92% rise, and the food and agriculture sector observed 89% increase from 2023. This surge can likely be attributed to the expansion of the RaaS threat actors targeting these sectors, which increased from 29 to 54 threat actors in the construction space and 20 to 37 in the food and agriculture space in 2024. The ongoing digital transformation in both the sectors has also likely expanded the attack surface, which increased interconnectivity and the adoption of IoT devices, introducing these new vulnerabilities every day. Cybersecurity maturity also varies across companies in these sectors, particularly affecting these smaller firms, making them more susceptible to attacks. Additionally, the complexity of supply chains and the reliance on multiple partners further amplifies their exposure to cyber threats. Being aware of these trends can help organizations operating in these sectors, and many organizations focus on the most impacted sector and might not dive into the details if they're not directly affected. However, examining the significant increase in sectors can also provide valuable insights into the activity landscape. In closing, although ransomware is largely opportunistic crime, it doesn't mean we should not try and understand different trends within data. Just like real world crimes that are also opportunistic, we don't just accept the fact that these crimes happen. We dive deeper into the data and look at it from both high level and a granular level perspective so we are better prepared to defend against it and be more resilient. Given the Lakeside victim data analysis shows that there are only 4 ransomware group operators that sit in the category of top and second most active groups, they're relatively easy to identify and add to prioritization list as it's widely reported on. It's the other ransomware groups that individually record between 0 to 199 victims that accounted for 67% of the other victims that we need to be cognizant of. That is, going by today's number of active ransomware operators, around 91 different groups are contributing to that death by 1,000 cuts phenomena. These are the ones that we need to understand their impact on the relevant sector or country so business can understand the unique threat posed to them by those players. While we cannot fully predict and prepare for a specific threat actor to target, understanding their previous and current victimology data will help us prioritize which ones to defend against. Thank you.